Russian President Vladimir Putin. Despite hailing from a fundamentally communist state, the Russian leader is anything but a communist. He is more of an imperial Russian czarist. Communism is not a sensation in Russia today. Now, if we see the war in Ukraine through the prism of Putin's fascination with czarist Russia, you might wonder whether this is an attack on Ukraine's sovereignty or just a Russian attempt to reclaim its past glory. Listen to what Putin said in June this year while invoking Peter the Great, a monarch of the Tsardom of Russia and later the Russian Empire from 7th May 1682 until his death in 1725. Putin said, "You might think he, Peter the Great, was fighting with Sweden, seizing their lands, but he seized nothing, he reclaimed it." Reclaiming, that is Putin's definition of war. Going by this definition, Putin reclaimed Transnistria in the 1990s, Georgia in 2008, and Crimea in 2014. And now he is on the path of reclaiming Ukraine in its entirety. But that is just one side of the coin. What has the West done so far to scuttle Putin's czarist ambitions? Turns out that the West has done a pretty good job at emboldening Russia without fail. For example, in 1989, right before the Cold War ended, over 315,000 US troops, which formed the main NATO military force, were permanently stationed in Europe. By 2014, when Russia annexed Ukrainian Crimea, their numbers had fallen 5 times to some 61,000. Within the same period, the number of US military aircraft in Europe fell from 800 to just 170. All of its 5,000 tanks were returned to the US. All in all, the US military presence in Europe by 2014 was only 15% of what it was in 1989. As per a Balkan Insight report, European NATO member states have also reduced their military forces after the end of the Cold War. By 2014, the average military budget in Europe was some 1.6% of GDP. In the meantime, Russia was intensively modernizing its weapons and reforming its military forces with military expenditure of between 3.2 and 5.4% of GDP. That provided strong military leverage to Russia against a weak NATO in the region, helping Putin step closer to realizing his czarist ambitions. Adding to that, what further neutered Europe was its over-reliance on Russian energy. This gives Russia the power to shut down Europe's gas supplies at its whims and fancies, closely followed by high inflation and a plummeting economy across the continent. This Russian energy trap is hard to break for Europe, even if the EU successfully weans itself from the Russian energy imports within the next 2 to 3 years. For example, Europe is in active discussion with nations like Algeria, Libya, Iran, and Qatar to replace Russian gas. However, the fact of the matter is, these all energy producing nations are closely tied to the Putin regime. Even if Russia doesn't have any practical control of the energy supplies of these nations, it is quite understandable how Putin will always be in a commanding position. And in a war-like scenario, Putin can simply ask these nations to squeeze gas or oil supplies to Europe. Putin is indeed a cunning geopolitician, but what makes him realize his czarist dreams are the West's ignorance and sleepwalk into Russia's diplomatic war games. NATO has a far superior military, but Russia has the world's largest nuclear arsenal. Europe has the economy, but Putin has the fuel that powers that economy. It isn't like the West doesn't acknowledge this. This is more like the West doesn't want to fix this. And That is what exactly makes Putin the Great.